increase our postgraduate program, together with recruitment of new academic staff, to expand our expertise base and our number of staff, and that will allow us to expand and intensify programs going forward. So I'm not sure if that was 1 minute, but that's me.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that introduction. It's certainly, I think, good to see leadership like yourself, being part of this new thing called entrepreneurship, especially coming from the agriculture sector or academia. Now, we are here basically because of this thing called the Global Entrepreneurship League. And besides that, we are seeing that in the country, in Botswana, or just not Botswana alone, in Africa, there is interest for agriculture, basically, in order to do this thing called food security, but also to try to get economies to stop importing food. What is your perspective in terms of the work that you guys are doing at the university from a regional perspective? Do you see Botswana having positioned itself in terms of the talent that's gonna go out and build agri businesses? Here we are talking about agri startups. What is your perspective on that project?
So I think as a starting point, I see agriculture as a business. Put politely, I don't really see it as a hobby. Buan's focus must be to train people to build successful, sustainable businesses in the agriculture sector, and that's both in production and in processing and in marketing and retail. But obviously our primary focus is around the production side. There are a lot of people who work time in agriculture. Everybody in Botswana seems to have land, which is a contrast to what we see in South Africa, where land access is a huge problem. In Botswana, more people have land. It may be in a far part of the country. It may not be that they work in Gaborone, but they have a farm in Tutume. Now, in practice, that means that people are farming remotely. Now, the question then becomes how to move that kind of smallholder agriculture, which often is quite low productivity or very low productivity, how to move that to being a commercially focused operation in which people are making their living from successful farming, whether it's in the horticulture sector, the field crop sector, the livestock sector. People need to be able to run commercial operations in order that we get to a stage where we've really got food security. So in terms of Buan's role within that, historically we have trained graduates who've gone into industry in a whole range of different roles. But one of the initiatives that we've started this year is to create a graduate entrepreneurship program. And that isn't a degree program, it's a program to develop small businesses over a period of 2 to 3 years, where our graduates will move into that program after they've completed their first degree, and they'll work on Buan land with Buan resources and Buan investment, but they'll build their own company and they'll build the resources such that at the end of the program, they're able to take their company, move out of the incubation space. They may stay on Buan land as the next phase of what they do and lease land from us, or they may move into other land, which they either lease or own, but they will leave us with either financial or agricultural assets. So, for example, if we have a team who build a dairy operation, and we expect to have dairy incubation, at the end of the 3 years, they will have created their own herd of dairy cows through breeding on the Buan herd. So that instead of us selling the young animals from that herd, they will become the assets that the entrepreneurs have earned. So when they leave our dairy operation, they leave with a nucleus herd of high quality, genetics and highly high productivity animals, which they can then start their own business with, which, as I say, they might start on Buan land, or they might take out and move onto other land, which they either lease or own. The intention is that we capitalize the young people. So we don't intend that we pay them a huge amount of money. We pay them a living allowance that will allow them to have a decent accommodation and living expenses. But we're not intending to make people rich with cash. We're planning to make them rich with skills and agricultural assets. And that program has just got started. And Buan is kicking it off with our own resources this year, but we are hopeful that there will be money in our government subvention to support it properly next year and going forward. And the intention is to start, I think we have 24 graduates who've entered the program now, and then we hope to enter about 36 graduates per year in the future. So we'll stabilize at about 100 people in maybe not as many as 100 small companies. There may be that some small companies are small groups of people, small teams of people, but it's a shift in our perspective on one side that we don't expect people to leave the university with a straight degree and then immediately be ready to run their own companies. We believe that there's a lot of learning needs to happen in the space of building a company, not just around production and production methodologies, but around marketing and around financial management, HR management, and building the networks that people need with the industry if you're going to survive once you've left the nest, if you want to call it
that. I mean, it's clear what you are saying. You are bringing basically agricultural innovation into academia, and you mentioned that your first observation is agriculture has always been a hobby in this market. That would be a mindset issue. How do you turn the guy who has vast land in Botswana into that commercial space? Would they have to then sign up into a university acceleration program, as you call it? How do you onboard it? Because I see two legs. You've got the one leg, which is the student-led incubation. Then you have the farmer that has the land and that has the asset, who should be making productive use of the land. Does your agricultural innovation program that you want to bring cater for these two different categories, or how are you going to basically onboard from maybe you could share from that process?
Yeah, so this program is focused on people graduating from our degree programs in the first, as its primary focus, and it expects to a large extent that the people we take into that program probably won't have access to land at the beginning of the program. For the farmer who's got land but needs to upskill, then there are other ways that we'll look to do that, rather than taking them out of their existing system and putting them into an incubation program here in Gaborone, because many of them will be in different parts of the country. We run short courses at the university through the CICE, and there are many of those courses which are 1 to 2 weeks long, which are designed to capacitate existing farmers or aspirant farmers with the skills necessary to be able to up the technology and skills base of their business without taking a year out or 3 years out to do a diploma or a degree, which probably is more than they need in order to advance their business skills. We're also looking to incorporate farmers as mentors into our entrepreneurship program, and that will assist them in terms of bringing skilled young people into their businesses while they assist in training in business skills and production expertise. Because a big part of farming is that you need experience. And this is why farms that are in families are often more successful than new entrants into the industry, because within the family, you've got a legacy of knowledge and experience and remembrance of previous issues and previous problems. Whereas if you come only with, I'm going to use the word book learning, but if you only come with your academic training, when you're faced with a sick animal or a new disease on your crop or the question of how are you going to manage your soil, you haven't got a lifetime experience of that, which is what you've got when you're in a family farming, in a farming family who've been on the land for generations. And I think that, that's something where mentorship and the relationship with existing farmers is going to be particularly important.
So I invited Dr. Khanamuze. I see she's here. I just want to acknowledge her on stage. Dr. G, maybe just to bring you in conversation, because you are a person of business. You are actually responsible for training a lot of business graduates in this country at the University of Botswana. What's your perspective on this points that Professor Jasparis talks about? Maybe you could just speak a bit, maybe start by introducing yourself.
You're muted, I think. We're not hearing you.
Yeah, Dr. G, I think your sound is not coming. Can you just release the? It shows you are not on mute though. Can we test, Dr. G? Something?
Just check the camera microphone settings in the middle of the panel at the bottom.
Yeah, technical. Can you try to help her with this problem? Anyway, while we let's check, Dr. G, is it now connected on your side? It's bandwidth issues. Dr. G, maybe you could log out and then log in again. Maybe it will work. Anyway, Professor, you speak about bringing two legs here. One is incubation, the other acceleration. Now, I'm keen on, what sectors are you looking at specifically? You talked about dairy production. What sectors will your incubation and acceleration program focus on? And what do you think are the strengths of BU and now for you to be able to, to drive your agenda as we go forward in building this ecosystem?
Yes, I think taking the first question, the incubation program, we started by saying it would focus on dairy and horticulture for vegetables in particular. And there were two major reasons for taking those perspectives. The first of which is that Buan has a dairy herd, although we're actually in the process of moving a dairy farmer and his herd on to Buan's farms, because we felt that in order to really drive the dairy production and training, it was better to have a professional farmer, experienced farmer, on the university's farm. So he's moving his whole business onto Buan farm from a tenancy elsewhere, and that will really strengthen the commercial viability of the project, but also bring in this long-term experience that I was speaking to in a way that I think will really help. The vegetables, horticulture vegetables side of things is a combination of, if we look at the imports on the agricultural sector, and to take some approximate numbers, 90% of dairy products are imported from South Africa, 50% of vegetables, 80% of fruit, are imported from South Africa, whereas we are self-sufficient for beef and chicken. So, and then most of the maize is, well, all of the maize is imported. Sorghum is all locally produced. Legumes, some are locally produced, some are imported, depending whether they're food or feed or what legumes they are. But there's a lot of opportunity to grow field crops and vegetables, and of course to grow them, to grow those industries in the short term. So the focus that we started with within the graduate entrepreneurship program, there will be a group who work on dairy. There will be several groups who work on horticulture. There are one or two other areas. I think there will be some entrepreneurs who work on pigs and some who work on broilers. And I know one who will work on herbs, which is a project she's been involved in for a while already. So there's a little bit of mix of saying what is strategic and where is there a specific demand to train somebody who's already got a specific business interest, as with the herbs. So this is partly a question of some of our students have had prior experience as they come into these programs. In order to participate, they're continuing something they've already been building towards already. For others, they're coming straight out of a degree program. Some have trained in Israel, where we've had an exchange program with Israel, and students have gone and spent a year there working in learning production techniques in different areas. And again, a lot of that has been either horticulture or dairy, working in Israel. So there's a number of factors that guide us. But the principal question is, what areas of agriculture do we need to expand in order to reduce the import bill and reduce the reliance on South Africa for food security? Now I've lost sound for both of you.
Dr. G, you can go ahead. Yeah, I think Dr. G is experiencing
maybe
a sound issue.
Maybe if it's a bandwidth problem, just stop your camera.
Yeah, let's try to help with that. Dr. G, if you can pause the camera, then we can. Okay, can you try one more time now? Okay, I've just asked her to type in her comments. They will come on screen because maybe it might be a bandwidth issue. Yeah. So it's very interesting. I mean, Professor, is that you mentioned 80%, 90% of import on, on things like fruits and vegetables. Are you telling me that all the apples that we eat and we buy from all shops, 80% of them are coming from outside the border? Is it an environmental issue why we're not able to produce these or what is the cause for this 80 and 90%?
So, yeah, the overall
or is it an
cost
issue
is
of a lack of expertise at the farm level?
I think there are several issues in there, and I'm not an economist, so Guy, let me say up front that my statements are rather generic. I think that just in terms of cost, the figure that's used is that the food import bill there's a 7 billion pula deficit in terms of food imports. In other words, we're spending 7 billion pula on importing food. In terms of why, so there's an element of saying some of it is about agroecological zones, what you can grow where. If you look in what's in the supermarkets, in terms of fruit, there's a lot of temperate climate fruit, apples, pears, table grapes, which are coming to the Western Cape, which is a very different climatic zone with Mediterranean climate, wet winters, warm, dry summers, the opposite of what we have here, and much lower temperatures. And those tree, particularly those tree crops, are very much, adapted to that kind of climate. Then there are things like strawberries, which are grown anywhere and can be grown anywhere, mostly grown under controlled environment, covered conditions. Could be grown here in Botswana, but requires both expertise and infrastructure to create that kind of an industry. And the South African issues are industry for strawberries very much dominated by one or two large companies. Similarly for something like tomatoes. So it's partly about people having the infrastructure and the skills to set up a large business that can compete on price and on quality. So in a general sense, my understanding is that we actually do okay on quality. But the reality is that, you see, if you look at all of the big supermarkets, with the exception of Choppies, are South African companies, and they're stocking out of Johannesburg. So they're buying fruit and vegetables in Joburg Fruit and Veg Market or Tshwane Fruit and Veg Market. They're buying in bulk, they're buying at very competitive prices, and then everything is packed and shipped from within South Africa. And they get the economies of scale, which make them very competitive. And then they come here, and in a generic sense, and I'm saying this in a very generic way, the price in Pula is the same number as it would be in rands if I was in Pretoria. So something that is 10 rand in Pretoria is 10 Pula in Botswana. And that means that there's significant markup because the exchange rate is not 1 for 1, it's 1 to 3.4, 3.5. So that's a challenge in terms of the way that the industries are structured, and they have a 60 million people market, and we have a 2 million person market. So their market is 30 times bigger, which also creates the problem of the economics of it. Then there's the question of, do people want to be in farming? And farms we visit who are doing commercial, small scale or large scale commercial production of vegetables, for example, are doing so very efficiently and very profitably and at very high quality. So it's not a question of saying it can't be done. There is a need for infrastructure, but there are government programs to support the necessary infrastructure, shade netting or glass houses. There's support for this, so there's financial support for that. Water is a challenge. There's no question about water being a challenge. And water access is a combination of the investment, if you're looking at boreholes, water quality, whether you're looking at boreholes or whether you're looking at water coming from dams. Well, that is a challenge. I think that those challenges they're technology challenges, and there are good technologies around to create water efficient closed environment greenhouse production systems in which the water loss is less than 3%. So it doesn't have to be that we put water into a greenhouse and it's all used up and evaporates and runs away. I think those are the technical challenges. I can see my colleagues, are typing in other comments with regard to mindset, and I think it would be good if they spoke to those. I don't know if we can.
I see, yeah, Dr. Jiu just typed in this, and she speaks that, she mentions the issue of mindset from as early as the one. So I'm really curious, with all the opportunity that you talk about, for this graduates who could ultimately tap into your knowledge base and start about making sure that by the time they graduate, proper agripreneur. Would you safely say that the graduates that come out of your university they don't have a mindset issue in terms of seeing opportunity, in terms of which business to get into? Because we are actually hearing the market say few Botswana are actually in agriculture. I mean, it's been put out, but we've seen a lot of graduate students who've been trained in the universities. Is there a mismatch in terms of what they learn and what they're supposed to do when they go in the real world? And how would you tackle that outside the incubation and acceleration program that you do? And I think here Dr. G is making in reference to say, if I am finishing my Form 5 and I see the application saying that I must go to Buen, do I already have it in my mind that I'm actually going to work in a farm in the sun? Or do I have to get out, get my degree on the street, run around for 2 years, give up? Then I start thinking of entrepreneurship as a last milestone. I mean, what needs to be done there for the Botswana to know that normal to import 80% of your fruits? It's not normal to have 90% of of your crops coming from outside the country. I mean, is it an education issue, or is it an issue of just generational knowledge maybe not going through the young people who are the most that are affected by this unemployment dividend? So perhaps you could maybe comment on that while I'm trying to get Dr. G back on stage.
So I think that there are many issues that come in an economy where there are other opportunities than agriculture that are the result of the funds that flow through the economy. I mean, the economy is 50% based on primarily diamonds, and that money flows through the economy in such a way that there are many, many types of jobs in the economy, both government jobs and private sector jobs. Botswana, is no longer, for many, many years, has not been a poor country. There is rural poverty, but a large proportion of people work in advanced technological business type environments, and they enjoy their farming activities on the cattle post or on the fields at the weekend, but they're farming because they enjoy it, but not necessarily because they're trying to make a lot of money out of it or run it as a commercial business. In terms of students coming to university, I think that one of the questions would be, why would you come to Buan if you were not interested in agriculture now today, or natural resources? But if you come to a specialist university, you come because that's your interest area. But at the same time, as a graduate, you're not expecting that you will then go and work as a farm laborer. You're expecting you'll go and run a farm, build a business, or work in an ancillary industry in which your expertise is used in support. And we have many graduates who work in support industries. I mean, a young man I met the other day is the expert at a local irrigation company selling irrigation equipment. He trained at Buan, and his expertise is widely recognized both as a consultant and as a technical sales employee at the company. He is very highly regarded, but he is not doing practical farming. So not everybody who trains at Buan is going to go into practical farming. And not everybody wants to work in the sun, as you put it. Although that is the nature of practical farming. In terms of entrepreneurship, I agree. I always say farming is a business, and I will always make that statement very publicly. To me, farming is not a hobby. And anybody who wants to do it as a hobby is welcome. But our job is not to train hobbyists. Our job is to train professionals to build industries and to build commercial operations. And growing up in the UK, farming was a business. It wasn't a hobby. And I should say, I started work on farms when I was 11 years old, which is a long time ago. And that's been my experience of farming everywhere I've worked in the world. So I think that our role as Buan is to drive the development of commercial farming. And that means that our students have to see farming as a business from year one, and they're not quite the same as saying have to be entrepreneurs from year one. They have to understand they're training for an industry. And whether they are entrepreneurs or whether they work in support and ancillary or whether they work for other people or whether they work for, big established commercial farms or build and move into their own big established commercial farm, not all of that can be described as entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is in its way a little bit more independent, a little bit more innovative, a little bit more risk-taking. And those are things which are very important for the process. And I should say, and I see Dr. G has come with a question of who qualifies to go incubator. So those who qualify to go in the incubator are those who, when we interview and assess them, they came across as being the ones who were excited by the idea of incubating their own business. So it wasn't based on what their grades were. It wasn't based on what their prior experience was. It was based on who we felt were exciting entrepreneurial types based on our assessment, primarily through an interviewing process. Some of them we knew already. Some of them they're all our graduates. But and to answer the question, all of the students coming into the entrepreneurship program, you missed a little bit of what I said at the beginning, I think, are who are graduates who've graduated last year or this year, and they are the ones who qualify to go into the incubator program. So it was set up this year, I'm going to say, as a closed recruitment from within the one graduate population, the class of 2020, the class who were approached. We didn't take it out and say anybody could possibly come in. We knew that we had to be limited in terms of scale because of it. We're limited at the moment in terms of budget. And so I think we had 32 applicants, and I believe we've taken 24 of them into the program this year. So the short answer is our own graduates qualify to go into the incubator program. Dr. G is asking, is it possible to incorporate incubation as part of the experiment?
Now to move along.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think you can take that last one before we move on to the next insight. Was that a question to you?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, the question of balance within a degree program is always one between the theory and the practical realities. So we, as management, but also our Student Representative Council, in particular, have been very active in talking to companies within the sector around Gaborone, in order to find companies who are willing to let students come in and get, let's call it, short-term practical experience of what it's like to work in a business. Our students also do a period of field practical training in January, February, and then again in a normal year in June, July. It won't happen this coming year because we've lost time with COVID, and the calendar has had to be moved around. But they do five or 6 weeks of field practical training, during which time they work in different types of businesses in the agri sector. They might work in companies that do support. Flowtech, for example, has been involved with that program for a while. Or they might go and work on a pure commercial production farm, where they would get 5 to 6 weeks of direct practical experience and mentorship. But we also have an agribusiness program, which is a full degree course, a bachelor's degree course. But we haven't yet created, let's call it like a side set of elective modules in which the students who are doing, let's say, crop science do an entrepreneurship module alongside their main degree program. But those are the sorts of things that can come in the future as we really get the entrepreneurship focus more developed at the institution, because these are new activities and new areas of focus for us.
So coming back to this issue, I think, Professor Rees, you know that Botswana has almost 4 million mobile phones. We got this data yesterday. I mean, I knew about it, though, that there are more than 4 million mobile smartphones in the hands of Botswana. And that means that Botswana are connected to the internet. Now, I'm sort of keen on the perspective of what happened during the lockdown. Like, the new world has now emerged where everything has to be digital. How has the farmer, how's the university preparing itself to leverage the internet to make sure that its delivery, or basically to help the agriculture sector to make quick adoption of digital solutions?
Yeah, so
I think you and I, we know companies like Aero Robotics who are able to remotely give.
Yes. So I think there are two things. There are companies who are using especially satellite data, but also data collected from other remote sensing and Earth observation platforms. Aerobotics is a really great example, really world-class company generated in the last few years by a couple of young guys from Cape Town. There's another company I have a lot of time for called FarmPin, and they're using satellite data to look at how land has been used, not just currently, but also historically. And they have a whole series of a suite of tools which allow the farmer to understand how fields have been used and what production, what is going on in production terms today. There are lots of opportunities for sensors and remote sensing technologies, not just for monitoring crops and livestock in terms of growth or health, but also for livestock in terms of monitoring position. So livestock tracking, allowing you to track, is your livestock on your farm? Is it outside your farm? Has it suddenly decided it will move up the highway at 80 kilometers an hour, which suggests it's been stolen and put in a truck? Or is it not moving? In which case it suggests your animal has got a problem. And the university has just engaged in a collaboration with a university in China called Northeast Normal University. And that will be a project in which we develop expertise together with them in what is called the Internet of Things, sometimes called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, but Internet of Things really being that we use sensors and probes and monitoring devices which are internet connected in order for us to collect data on a continuous basis, whether it be on an animal or a field or a temperature environment or whatever it is we wish to collect. And that's particularly going to be valuable for livestock monitoring and management, but also for controlled environments for things like greenhouses. So that's a project that literally has just been signed off. It's right at the beginning of its development cycle. But certainly in China, they've got a lot of expertise in remote sensing and Internet of Things technologies. They need collaborators on the agriculture side in order to be able to put that sort of technology into practice. So that for us as Buan, that's quite a big step forward in terms of what we're doing. I don't know of universities in South Africa which are busy with that level and scale of technology. So for once, we hope that we will be able to get ahead of the neighbors and do something that they haven't yet really been able to do with that spectrum of activities. But those are going to be the sorts of ways in which farming technology moves forward. I think that once you start to collect big data across an agricultural system, then you start to be able to look at things like patterns of disease, utilization of water, suitability of planting times, conditions that are optimal for disease development, monitoring of pests, the locust swarms that are developing in various parts of particularly Eastern Africa, but also in northern Botswana, where locusts have been identified. That kind of monitoring is really key to being able to do national level management of pests and diseases, and prediction of, management of soil data is critical to understanding fertilizer utilization and these sorts of things. So the collection of big data in farming is going to be a very big shift in the way that farming operates in the future, and it will function whether you are a smallholder farmer or whether you are a large-scale farmer. The collection of that data, because it occurs across a landscape, it doesn't matter whether you're small or large, you can access the data and see your data within the context of a larger system. And that's going to be really, really important. In the end, you see, you'd like to feed that data back to one of those 4 million smartphones, which I agree are not all smartphones, but I must say that Botswana is interesting. To me, in South Africa, everybody has one cell phone. Botswana, everybody has 2 cell phones, which it doesn't quite get us to the 4 million, but it suggests people have got cell phones, at least 2 each, and from very young age. And I understand that's something to do with coverage and companies and whatever. But in practice, smartphones are very widespread, and our ability to put really useful data interpretation back to the farmer through a smartphone is really, really, really critical to using big data and the technologies that go with interpretation of it. So I think tremendous opportunities, both for the industry, but also for Boan in the space going forward.
So would you say safely you are establish a regional base that could become a benchmark for SADC?
Sorry, you're breaking badly. Could we say that? So you said something that would be, just repeat what you said.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, would you safely say that then you are not short of agricultural scientists in order for you to establish a regional base or launch pad for new agricultural technologies?
We're always short of scientists. In this world, we always want more and more skilled people. I think that there are two, yes, nationally. I mean, Botswana is a small country at 2 million people. We have one agricultural university. Obviously, we have UB and BIOST and as other substantive, and one or two other structures like BTRI. There's other substantive science technology bases, but we are a small community of science, and we definitely need more people. I think that, one of the great challenges for us is that historically we don't have funding for masters and PhD students. And so students who want to study at that level, a few of them self-fund and study within the country, but the vast majority leave the country either with government support or with external scholarship support, of which there's a great deal. And they go and study elsewhere. And having studied elsewhere, many of them finish up living elsewhere. In part because they don't see the science system in Botswana as being strong, and therefore they don't see how they would return here, having worked in a more, a higher technology, better funded environment. So we lack research funding, and we lack scholarships and bursaries at postgraduate level. And this is really a major inhibitor to growing a knowledge-based economy. And as we look at what we're doing at Boan, we're trying to address those issues both by releasing some money for scholarships and bursaries in the short term, and negotiating within our budget space for a proper program of postgraduate scholarships, bursaries for Boan, for agricultural and natural resources going forward, but also talking to the other universities about the need for financial support at that level in their disciplines as well. And this is something we really have to address at a national level. You cannot build a knowledge-based economy without the knowledge. And the knowledge comes from that higher level of education and training, and the research focus that goes into a postgraduate environment. And so I think this is a really critical gap. And Boan is also aiming to address the opposite end of that gap, which is the mature skills gap, by recruiting. We're currently advertising for some 40 academic staff posts, and we expect to recruit those staff from all over the world, to bring in the best people we can find who are interested to come and work in Botswana, which is, I mean, I've been here 10 months, 9 months. I have to say, it's a beautiful country. It's a country with enormous opportunity, and I think a really great place to come and work. So, of course, we have existing staff within Buan who will continue to train and develop, but we need to create much greater capacity, much faster than we can do just based on the local development of staff. And so you need diversity of people's backgrounds and people's training and people's expectations of what they can do. And that's also part of the reason for not just growing our staff, but aiming to internationalize our staff more going forward. So yes, there is a shortage of scientists within the country. And it is surprising. I mean, I worked in South Africa for 25 years. The boundary isn't just a geographical boundary between Botswana and South Africa. People are, in Botswana, we don't know about the South African system, and the South Africans don't know what there is in Botswana. And this is a really, it's a really concerning gap, because you would expect that within the region, we would be building good, strong collaborative systems within SADC, and in reality, we're not. We're operating in lots of silos. There are many reasons for that, but none of them are good reasons.
So I mean, it's good that you mentioned this, and I like your collective call to action for collective responsibility in terms of creating a regional ecosystem where we should deliberately know what's happening in South Africa, where those in Botswana should know what's happening on that side in order to leverage advantage. Now, what is the impeding factor? I mean, what is the challenge? Is it the farmer or is it the industry? Where is the challenge in terms of this ecosystems that make the sector not to be so productive? Because we know in South Africa you have small little organized group farmers that are able to give you any commodity you need. I mean, last time I checked, I hear South Africans were preparing themselves to export food to China because they know China is so big. So what is the impeding factor for Botswana's farmers to organize themselves to really get rid of the 7 billion pula import bill of food?
Yeah, so I think there are many factors. If we take the export-oriented factor to start with, so if you look at the South African food production systems, and then you look at they're sending to China, the big change recently is that they've opened up exports of citrus to China. Now, it's taken a very long time. China negotiates one commodity at a time with each country, and they negotiate that commodity access until they're really ready to buy that commodity. So citrus exports from South Africa to China were negotiated, I don't know, let's say for 15 years, until the Chinese were ready to buy, and then suddenly everything was approved. And now South Africa can export to citrus to China, and within 2 or 3 years, it's become a huge market, because with a quarter of the population, you can absorb a lot of oranges, let's describe it that way. And so that has resulted in a massive growth in South African citrus production, and they are now the second largest exporter of citrus in the world after Spain. And that it's a combination of people seeing the opportunity, investing in new citrus orchards in advance of the export market becoming available. So it's people seeing the opportunity and making the investments, and obviously that means there's got to be money to be invested. It's about growing the skills base of people who've got the horticultural experience in citrus production. It's about having an industry that is organized through Citrus Research International and the industry bodies that are that liaise that industry and do the negotiations with China. So if your industries are not organized, they're not easily going to be competitive in the big wide world. So where we're a small industry, then that has its effects. But you also have to look at it and say, why in Tule Block are we not growing oranges at the same rate that they're growing them in the same areas they're growing them on the other side of the river in Limpopo? And the answer is, we're not investing. And so you have to invest in agriculture in order to make it grow in that way. You have to invest in your markets, you have to invest in your export structures. And if the country wants to make agriculture a successful operation, it's got to be export oriented. And for many farmers, they've got to look at how can they grow high value products for the export market. And this is if people are growing sorghum and getting 400 kilograms a hectare, you're never going to be able to compete when you're growing a crop that has a value of 2,500 pula a ton, and then you're growing 1,000 pulas worth of grain on a hectare. That is never going to be commercially viable and competitive. And part of it's about what is the best use of the water. Water is the most valuable commodity we have, and much more so than land or fertilizer or anything else. And if we don't use the water effectively, if we don't manage its use efficiently, then we're wasting a resource that is too precious to waste. So it is about growing the right crops. It's about growing the right markets. It's about understanding what is the right export. And, should we be trying to use our water for high value crops and using that to import lower value products like maize, which we import into the country in large volumes because it's a staple food? But is it useful for us to use our water to produce maize and reduce that bill? Or should we instead use the water to grow something of higher value, which we export into an export market where we make more money and bring more money in, so that in the end, we don't have a trade deficit, a negative trade deficit. We have a trade surplus of imports for over exports, but we may be importing things like maize, which are lower value, and exporting other things, maybe nuts or fruit, which are high value. And understanding where those markets are is critical to understanding how to design a way forward for the industry to make the best use of the resources we have.
It looks like you have a very interesting new strategy for Buen. It certainly sounds very exciting, because in my view, it's talking about bringing in new ideas, merging it together with expertise borrowed from both the local market and from experts around the world. And you are challenging the ecosystem, or whoever should provide the funding to accelerate these ideas in order to to take the ecosystem to the next level. Now, your leg, are you going to now push for livestock production, or is it going to be crop production, or you will do a hybrid? Because certainly, Botswana has been blamed to be a master of many and achiever of none. So will you position the university to purely look at itself from a business perspective, or will it strengthen its staff and scientific that it's been doing? Or do you look at combining both the new core that you say is business and strengthening also the science which you are finding on the ground? What is your course of strategy among those 2 points I make?
Yeah, so the reality is that there are some areas of the country which are very favorable for livestock production, especially beef and small stock. And there are other areas of the country for which horticultural production is really the best option, and there'll be other areas for which field crops, grain crops, legumes and cereals are going to be better favored. There isn't a one-size-fits-all strategy here. Beef is critically important, and growing the beef industry so that it can exploit its export potential, particularly in the European Union markets where we have favored access and what should be very profitable access. But to grow that, we have to grow the quality, and we have to be able to sell at the top end of the market. We have to be able to develop a market niche for Botswana beef, which is which gets it recognized as being high quality and best in the world, because we're small volume compared with, Botswana's beef exports are below 1% of the world total, compared with Argentina and Brazil, which export enormous volumes of beef into Europe. And you can't compete on quantity with countries that have that level of product, and so we have to compete for quality. But at the same time, we also have to ensure we do local food production and it's high quality and it's high availability throughout the year. So there are a range of factors which will influence that. And then we have to look at where we can develop export markets to bring currency into the country. So one is not going to look at it and say, oh, we're only going to focus on vegetables, or we're only going to focus on small entrepreneurs. We have expertise across crop science, animal science, environmental sciences, and technologies. And I think with all of those, we are really looking at, how do we integrate those so that we produce integrated programs which will address the needs of the beef industry as an industry across its full value chain. So whether we're looking at primary production, we're looking at animal health, we're looking at meat quality, or we're looking at the economics of the industry, we should be able to engage across that full value chain, from producer to customer, sometimes called from farm to fork. But if we, as a university, we should be able to engage with problems across that value chain and recommend solutions.
Finally, before we go to a conclusion, Professor Rees, I sit on the internet 24 hours, 7 days a week, and every day I see there's a group on Facebook called the Motuo, where farmers are consulting, basically. If I have a problem in my farm, the first thing that I do is I go on that group. This is what I see Botswana do. And I got worried the other day when somebody asked, how safe is this information or this feedback? How can the university come in, to use technology to credibly make sure that these things that happen on the internet, because the internet is not disappearing, how can we bring in expertise into these public platforms as a new form of education? Like nowadays, people, they Google stuff, they look for stuff on the internet. During COVID, I found myself going to the shop buying seeds, and I had no idea what to do. And somebody said, just throw them on the soil. And I asked myself, when are we looking forward to finding content that is created by Buen on the internet? Because the internet is the next infrastructure. I'm saying this because I would like that platform or that community that Botswana have created to be safe and to be credentially up. Even if we throw in blockchain to make sure that if something in there is not safe and it's been recommended, we can pick it and say, no, that's not correct. Because the world needs to be safe. It's food that we eat. It's stuff that is given to animals. It's stuff that's given to chickens. It's such an interesting ecosystem. And I asked your team to say, do you see an opportunity to community into a safe environment where things are tested and tracked? And all I'm asking is there potentials for a Fab Lab type of environment where you can think around and create things together with farmers? This one is for the ordinary farmers, who doesn't have the capacity to sit in the university, but they know that their best friend is the phone that can give them the answer in the fastest time period. Is that something that will come together with your partnership with the university that you mentioned about? And finally, what will excite a new 21st century guy coming from Matas Bay or coming from Naledi to join Buen? Because right now, guys, they know they're being told degrees are no longer needed. You can learn everything from the internet. Are you quickly positioning yourself to make sure that this new generation youth can now begin to see you guys as a resource and to be part of your? That would be my last question, and you give us your last nugget.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the internet is a wild place. It has been for a long time. Um, there's an element of saying you've got to take what you find there. You've got to look at it and say, what did I pay for this? And if you paid nothing for it, you have to decide what the value of it is. There's a lot of great information on the internet, very accurate information, very useful information, provided by both reputable and amateur sources. There's no question about it. It's an incredible resource, and I think all of us of all generations, when asked to check a fact, say, "I'll just Google it." And we go to Google. I know other people might go to other sources of information, but we all go to Google and we look at the top 10 hits and we decide that's the answer based on the top 10 hits. And it doesn't answer what the question is. The answer is sitting somewhere out on the internet now. And I mean, I've watched the internet develop since the early 1980s, which is before most of you would see the internet as having existed. But the quality of information is always going to vary, and it does depend on what you find. I mean, if you were to look for information on COVID vaccines, you would find all sorts of different sites telling all sorts of different stories about safety and availability and who's testing what. And for many people, it's very confusing. I don't know how to judge the quality of that information. So organizations like Buan have a responsibility to place credible information online through whatever resource. It might be through a website, it might be through on the phone, it might be even through newsletters and hard copies that get distributed. There are many ways in which we can distribute that kind of information. Of course, we have a Facebook page and a Twitter feed and LinkedIn and other places where we post information. But what we really need to be able to do is to provide a credible archive of resources of all sorts, training manuals or updates on disease or access to weather data and recommendations on fertilizer and all sorts of things of that nature, recognizing that you can run into all sorts of problem areas where you get involved in a Facebook discussion about something, and then the next thing you know is that it's turned into a internet firefight and everybody is busy shouting at each other, and that's not a useful space for my staff to get involved with. So we really have to be careful that we're in the right place doing the credible things and providing credible information. But I think as we stand at the moment, we're not there as an institution. It's something that needs to come. A lot of the focus this year has been on online teaching rather than resources outside the degree space. I think that will take us in interesting directions in terms of the way that everybody has had to pick up and learn to teach online, not necessarily fully online, but to use online platforms in a way that we haven't done before. That's been a big transition for the educational environment at the university. And I think what's coming will then be to look at how do we use those platforms to deliver short courses, to deliver other information that's going to be of value, to farmers and other members of the agricultural sector. But it is a big process. You want your information to be correct and credible. You don't want to upset, the industry by saying the wrong thing, and then everybody goes off and does something inappropriate. So, there's a quality control aspect to it. But there is no question about it that, the farmer of the future should be able to get access to accurate information, accurate training programs and manuals, appropriate recommendations, whether they be on seed varieties or fertilizer usage or water management. And they shouldn't have to come to the university to do a course in order to be able to access that information. They should be able to get it from wherever they're operating within the country. And one would like to say in the end, within the region, because I believe that Botswana has really has many opportunities to become a major driver within the SADC region for scientific, scientific excellence as we go forward. If that's the route we choose to take as a country, we have the opportunity to do it in ways that perhaps other countries around us don't have.
Anyway, that is Professor Jesper Rees as Chancellor. When the only agriculture university that I know about in Botswana, if not in SADC, if I'm correct. Thank you so much for making time this afternoon to chat with us as part of the Global Entrepreneurship Week, to share your insights about the potentials for building a localized agri ecosystem, if not regional, one that could unlock food security for Botswana. We certainly thank you for making time and hope that the rest of the university will support you in your new strategy, your new vision, which is certainly, I think, makes sense for us in the entrepreneurship world. We will bring ourselves very closer to you to ensure that we can support your vision as you try to support the growth of the academia in terms of agriculture and obviously also the productivity of the agriculture sector in the country. The Global Entrepreneurship Week, I would like to thank you and ask you to say your last words and then this session will end.
Yeah, well, really just thank you for inviting me on here. It's been, it's been an interesting conversation. I hope we've reached a good audience. I hope some of them are Buan graduates, and if they are, I'm going to say hello to you. These are conversations which are really valuable for us as an institution to listen to the input that comes not just in the conversation, but that comes through afterwards. And of course, for us as Buan, to be visible in the community and participate in these sorts of things is also really crucial. So thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for the time we've spent this afternoon, and we look forward to doing some more of this in the future.
Thank you, Professor Rees. Colleagues, those that are joining us virtually, the hashtag is GEW 2020. We are doing session 2 of GEW 2020. Please follow the page Global Entrepreneurship Week. For those that missed the session, we'll share it with Professor Rees. We'll send him the recording. He can give to the university to post on their page such that it can reach more people. But it will also appear on all the partner pages. So on behalf of the colleagues that are supporting on the background, thank you, everybody. We look forward to you joining the next session at 3 p.m. Cheers. Bye-bye, Professor Rees.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and bye-bye.